Welcome to our Zoom event this afternoon entitled Scaling Ziggurat, a virtual walkthrough and a conversation between the artists Pee-wee Roldan and Chương-Đài. After this brief introduction, we will show you a walkthrough with the artist and onto a Q&A and conversation with Chương-Đài. I am Rachel Rillo, co-director here at Silverlens. I am tasked to speak to you and do this introduction, pretty much to let more people into this event, to this session. I guess if we were at a concert, I would be the front act to the rock stars. So on to the rock stars. Ziggurat is the title of Pee-wee's show here at the main gallery space. And not only did Chương-Đài write the essay for the show, she also played a large part in the Pee-wee's process building up to it. Thank you for joining us from Hong Kong, Chương-Đài. Good to see you. Chương-Đài is a researcher at Art Asia Archive, specializing in modern and contemporary art in or related to Southeast Asia. Her curatorial focus include collective platforms, ephemeral practices, social movements, and marginalized genealogies. Obviously, curatorial interests that led her to Pee-wee and Green Papaya. In 2018, she undertook the Green Papaya Archives project under Art Asia Archives, and I believe is still going on. Norberto Pee-wee Roldan is one of the first people I met here in the Philippines in the art world in 2006. He founded Black Artists in Asia in 1986, a group with a socially and politically progressive practice. In 1990, he initiated Viva XCon, Visayas Islands Visual Arts Exhibition and Conference, which is the longest running biennale in the Philippines. He co-founded Green Papaya Art Projects in 2000, which remains to be the longest running independent and multidisciplinary platform in the country. He is a godfather to many contemporary artists here in the Philippines. Thank you, Pee-wee, for a wonderful show and for being with us this afternoon. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Norberto Roldan, but my friends in Manila, they call me Pee-wee. Welcome to my show, and welcome to Silverlens. My original plan for the show was totally different. I have been preparing for this solo show since 2 years ago. But since the pandemic struck, I was totally at a loss on how to complete the work, because the show required us to collaborate with some embroiderers. And that left me clueless on how to proceed. The situation even became worse when Green Papaya was hit by fire last June 3, where I had most of my works, both works in progress and those who came back from exhibitions abroad, were stored. I was on the verge of canceling this show, actually. But after talking to Isa, she sort of challenged me on not just to try to restore the works that were damaged by the fire, but to try to build something on them. And so the works here are actually composed of parts that were burnt or partly burnt from the fire, and with components that were newly added, like the bottom portion of the Ziggurat altars. This particular series, they've been work in progress since 2017. But when the pandemic struck, they were stored in Kamuning. And so all of them were in the space of Green Papaya when the fire happened. They originally counted 14, but after the fire, I was lucky enough to be able to gather about 10 of them, although 2 of the boxes are damaged. The only new works in this exhibition are the 3 cabinet ziggurats put together from second-hand cabinets that I found in different second-hand stores within the Kamuning district. And everything, all the objects that are in the cabinets have also been sourced in the same second-hand stores. I wanted to come up with a work that would signify something like a triumph over defeat, of being able to rise from the tragedy. And I thought that the sort of monumental scale of the cabinet would signify that. Definitely the show did not happen without the full support of my gallery, Silverlens, Isa Lorenzo's encouragement. But also I would like to express my gratitude to Chương-Đài of Asia Art Archive for having been my constant dialogue partner while I was doing the works. And she did a perfect essay for the work, which I think is an appropriate description of the process and of the intention of the exhibition.
I will begin. First of all, I'd like to thank Pee-wee and Silverlens for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. And I'd like to thank Pee-wee for inviting me to be a part of the process in your art making. For our audience, I just want to let you know that Pee-wee and I will talk for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. If you do have a question, please type it in the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen. And then after the conversation, there'll be another short video in which Pee-wee talks about the works having come out of the fire. I'd like to begin by asking Pee-wee to elaborate a little more. And so for our audience members who are not familiar with what happened in June, the fire that Pee-wee talks about, Pee-wee, can you say a bit more about what it meant to make work after the fire? Of course, this is on top of the pandemic, right, and everything that's happening in Manila right now. In the video, you talk about the series 100 Altars for Roberto Chabet, and also Fugitives from the Land of the Rising Sun, that they were works that were in the communing location of the Green Papaya site. However, the cabinets were new pieces entirely, but you did also add a new layer to the cabinets that are the 100 altars for Roberto Chabet. Yeah, and specifically, it's the bottom layers with the fluorescent lights, right? That when they are lit up, they allude to fire. So, can you speak first about what it meant to you to make these works, in the aftermath of a fire that destroyed a lot of the material from Green Papaya, and also part of the Green Papaya art collection itself?
I would like to start with how difficult it was when the pandemic struck, actually. And that was even before the fire happened. And my realization is that the pandemic did not imprison our minds. On the other hand, being on quarantine made the brain the most active organ of our body. Although the pandemic curtailed our physical actions and movements, the mind revolted even more to get things done in some other ways. But when the fire happened, the limitations imposed by the fire and the damages that it rendered to most of the works, only made me more aggressive and tireless in proving to myself that I can rise above the tragedy. It would normally take me between 8 to 16 months to complete a solo exhibition. But it took me 4 months to complete the Ziggurat exhibition that me and my assistant did 24/7. I also took advantage of the COVID protocols, like not allowing senior citizens to leave their homes. So I was just simply obliged to work. And in a way, Ziggurat happened in these circumstances. The fire did not damage only my own works that were stored in Green Papaya, but more than my works, the fire damaged 20 years of our archives that were being digitized with the help of the Asia Art Archive, of which Chương-Đài is very much a part of. So while dealing with a commitment to hold the exhibition,
there was also this huge responsibility to do my best to save what has been left of the archive. And we were lucky enough that another institution came into our rescue. And maybe this is an opportunity to mention the Lopez Memorial Library for coming to our rescue to help us save the archives. Have I answered your question, Chương-Đài? Or am I?
Yeah, so maybe I can just give our viewers a little context, which I should have done earlier, I realized. So in 2018, Green Asia Archive started working with Green Papaya to archive Green Papaya's material, because at that time you were thinking that you'll close Green Papaya in 2020, right? Yes. Through the archiving process, we have organized the physical material and put them in boxes, and you and your team moved those boxes to the Kamini location of Green Papaya. Right? And unfortunately, on June 3rd, there was a fire that burnt some of the material, but not all, luckily. A lot of it was saved, and and so a lot of it was archival material that was saved, and also parts of the art collection that was saved. And then there were also artworks. And so in that fire, there was the 100 altars for Roberto Chabet, which you were able to salvage some of them. And also fugitives from the land of the rising sun, right? And I remember talking to you, receiving your phone call that morning of the fire. And then, we spoke many times afterwards. And when we were talking about how to think about this solo exhibition, I think initially you were thinking that what were you going to do? Because the embroidery project that you had initially planned for, you couldn't do because of the restrictions regarding the pandemic. But then you talked to Isa, and she suggested that you worked with the altars, right? And since some of them were burned, then we talked about what were you going to do? Were you going to build new altars, or would you take out the burnt parts? What was it, right? And I think one of the things that I find very poignant about this project is that you kept the burnt parts. So can you say a little bit more about what that meant for you, and how that changed the project? Because this is a project that you started in 2015, right? And here with the burnt parts, it really marks a particular time, both for you and also for the project. Right, so can you just say a little bit more about that?
I started with the 100 altars for Roberto Chabet way back in 2015. I was not a student of Chabet, although I was educated in UST for my arts degree. I only met Chabet in 1998. He became very supportive when we opened up Green Papaya in 2000. And ever since, he's been very, very proactive in our programs, hanging, designing, curating some shows of his students. But at the same time, we became friends, and he would become a sort of secret advisor. I've always been fascinated with his practice, like the Ziggurats, but not only the Ziggurats, but also his China collages. And I thought that to appreciate the friendship with him and in honoring him, I started the 100 altars. And in 2016, I had the opportunity to be part of an Southeast Asia Forum, which is another section in Artist Singapore, where the altars were first exhibited internationally. These were the altars that came back from abroad that were stored in Green Papaya at the time of the fire. Why are the works important to me? Aside from the works being a tribute to Shabet, actually, the works were meant to be testaments of our urban decay, and in particular, what has been happening in the Kamuning district. As most of us in the Philippines would know, Kamuning is one of the oldest districts in Metro Manila. Before the war and right after the war, it used to be, there were a lot of pretty bungalows all over the place. But I think in the 80s towards the 90s, the bungalows started to disappear. And in their place, we now find a really very unpleasant buildings in their place. And so I started to question what it means to develop, or what it means, or what is progress in terms of urban development. Um, the remnants of this architecture, I think, are palpable testimonies of a bygone era that was more elegant in terms of what we see around. And if what we see around is a representation of development and progress, then I think we're going the wrong way. So that altars are more about my take on what urban development is all about, and where should the Philippines be heading in terms of preserving its heritage, its old buildings, and its old structures and districts.
Pee-wee, can you also talk about your reference to Shabet's Ziggurat in particular? When I was writing the essay, I was looking back to his collages, and one of the Ziggurat projects is the King Kong Ziggurat, right, which is one of my favorite of Shabet's works. And for me, it was quite uncanny, the reference to the Ziggurats, and looking at the King Kong Ziggurats, because that piece very much speaks to our vanity, in terms of this. King Kong was taken from the jungle, right, to be displayed as an object, as entertainment. And so for me, in many ways, it was a very apt, if uncanny metaphor for the pandemic, right, which is to a certain extent the result of us infringing on the habitats of other species and our relentless use of natural resources. And then, of course, the ziggurat itself is also something that goes back to Mesopotamia. Right? It was a complex where priests would ask the gods for blessings, as a way to prevent disasters or to thank the gods for something. And so I like to ask, why you were thinking specifically about the ziggurats.
I love all the other works that Shabet was doing during his active life. I love his China collages, but I think I'm more inclined to the ziggurats because of its sacred form, and it is Shabet's particular series of works that I can claim closer to what I've been doing in terms of building and constructing sacred objects and collages and installations. I am drawn towards these religious symbolisms, I think, because there is a redemptive factor to them. You may be appropriating some objects that have been relegated to the dustbin of history or practically useless objects. But once you put them together into a form, like a sacred form, then you some kind redeem them from being useless objects. Um, the thing about the Ziggurat also is it's got this impression of a pretty strong architectural structure, because it's got this vertical form that has a solid base. So it also represents something of firm belief on something, and maybe a firm belief on a God, or a firm belief on the universe, or a firm belief on a particular philosophy or principle. So other than form, I think it's the philosophy behind the Ziggurat that has attracted me to it.
The other series in this exhibition is Fugitives from the Land of the Rising Sun. And we had talked about your use of the word fugitives in the title. Can you explain that for our viewers?
Yeah. Well, the fugitives are normally the escapists, right? They escape from crimes, they escape from disasters, or they just escape in order to disappear from the mob or from elsewhere. Um, the fugitives actually have been sitting in the storage area even before the fire, and it was meant to be a series of works about Japanese characters in a novel or in novels that have yet to be written. And I am lucky enough to be situated in Kamuning, where there are at least 3 Japanese surplus stores around me. And so it's been my exercise every week to go around and see what things there are that are of interest to me. So I've been gathering all these Japanese objects probably since 5 years ago, and I found these old boxes that I learned were used as fish containers in the wet market, because I asked a friend to read the kanji text on the side, and it says about the fish market. And then I started to collect. Surprisingly, there are photos of old photos of Japanese personalities from the secondhand stores, and yes, and Japanese, haiku, poetry. So I thought that it would be interesting to combine all these components and be able to tell a story with each box. When the fire happened, as I mentioned earlier in the video, they were all stacked up in the storage of Green Papaya, because there was no way for me to continue working on them in that space. But now I still consider myself lucky to be able to save. There are 10 of them in the series. 2 of them were badly damaged on the side, but I think they're still quite intact. And I wanted them to be part of the exhibition to remind myself that, hey, these objects might have been damaged, but they're not totally lost, and they're here, and they still carry the same stories that I've been wanting to tell.
What I find interesting about this series is it reminds us of the multi-ethnic history of Kamuning, right? And of course, also the presence of the Japanese in the Philippines. Can you say a little bit more in terms of your use of local materials? Because a lot of your projects, not only these 2 series, but other series that you've done, is you collect objects from the places where you live, right? In this case, it's Kamuning, but I know that other projects, you have collected objects from Rojas, and you had your family members help you to collect those objects as well. And those series, I think, heavily remind us of the history of Catholicism in the Philippines, and also the presence of pop culture. So can you say first, or talk first about your use of objects in the Kamuning neighborhood, and then the stories that you've told through the objects from Rojas?
I treat these objects not necessarily as ethnographic objects, although of course they are imbued with these qualities. But my treatment of these objects is to deal with them in between contemporary art and anthropology. They may signify something anthropologically, but at the same time, as ready-mades, they can be made into a different vocabulary, like a contemporary vocabulary. So when I use a particular object, it does not necessarily mean that the objects retain their original values or their signifier, but using these objects allow me actually to transform them and render them with new signifiers. I have not been using objects only in my practice, but I've also been appropriating indigenous materials like fabrics, for example. So I come from an island where there used to be a vibrant patadyong industry. The patadyong is a local fabric that our people used to wear. Okay? So it's a wraparound skirt, but it's also a multifunctional fabric that you can use in your everyday life. So I've been using the patadyong fabric for some time. Maybe in the last 20 years, I have been coming back and forth to the patadyong. But when I use the patadyong as an object or some material, I don't necessarily use them as an indigenous item, but rather situate an indigenous component into a contemporary narrative. So there is an attempt for me to combine the indigenous character of a particular material with what I am trying to say in a contemporary form.
Mm, yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk specifically about your use of local objects in one of the cabinets. Right. So I'm thinking in particular the cabinet with the lottery machine, right? Which I know you had intended as a gift for your brother. For me, that piece is very special, for many reasons. Can you say a little bit about that piece?
It's the slot machine. I found the slot machine in one of the Japanese stores, I think about 2 years ago. And I wanted to give that machine to my brother and sister-in-law, who were based in the province, but who would come to Manila to spend their R&R in casinos. But during the last 2 years, there were more important matters that we had to attend in the family, so I forgot all about it. Until the pandemic happened. And then I lost my brother and my sister-in-law when they contracted COVID-19. So when I was in the process of building the work for the exhibition, I thought of using the slot machine as a tribute or a remembrance of my brother and sister-in-law who passed away. So of course, that particular work has become very important to me. And the exhibition in private has even become more significant and important and memorable for me.
I think it's also a piece that really illustrates what you were saying earlier about how you took advantage of the lockdown to turn something that was really a terrible situation in something that could be productive, right? So you didn't let the limits that were imposed restrict your creativity, and your intellectual engagement with the world. And I think that these cabinets, they really come out of a time when art becomes even more important for us, like as a way for us to focus our energy and to channel our energy into something that is about life, right? And that is about moving through a very difficult time.
Thank you for that, Chương-Đài.
I'd like to remind our audience members, if you have any questions, please feel free to type your question in the Q&A. We have, I think, about 10 more minutes. But unless I see any questions, I'll just continue asking Pee-wee other questions. So Pee-wee, can we talk a little bit more about your use of local material, right? One of the things you said was that you don't use local or indigenous material as ethnographic, right? I mean, I think that is very much it engages with the history of colonialism, I think, in a very productive way, and it, in a way, isn't even interested in that conversation, right? In the sense that you're thinking about those objects very differently. Can you talk about your process and using those objects from Rojas and what it says about your relationship to Rojas? Because I'm thinking the larger context of your practice, that you were a member of the Black Artists of Asia. You're very much invested in Viva Excon and creating an art scene in the Visaya. So all of this really goes together, in terms of the activism that you have done to create this very important art scene, and to think about art as both a form of community building, but also a form of social justice. Right? So can you say a bit about that?
Thank you, Chương-Đài, for bringing this up, because I actually been wanting to articulate more about where am I in terms of my practice, because I think most people believe that an artist's practice ends up in galleries and museums and in an exhibition context. But I would like to believe that my practice as a visual artist extends beyond that. And as an artist, you also have to be an organizer. You have to be part of your community, so that your practice extends beyond your studio, it extends beyond the galleries and the museums. In fact, you'll find yourself more sometimes being actively engaged and involved in community actions. And my practice is not, I don't see my practice as separate from it being an organizer. in 1986, when we organized and founded the Black Artists in Asia, that was an extension of our political work when we were at the front lines of the protest movement against the dictator Ferdinand Marcos. And during the time, we were very much part of the concerned artists of the Philippines. But when Cory Aquino took power, there was a shift in alliances in the movement, and the Black Artists in Asia was a strategic formation to continue with our work as activists, as progressive artists, but at the same time, no longer part of what they so-called the progressive left at the time. The Viva XCon is as well considered to be an extension of my practice when I initiated Viva XCon. As Viva XCon is again a political action that was meant to broaden the alliance of artists within the Visayas. Maybe, for the benefit of our audience, I just would like to put context into Viva XCon and Roja City that you mentioned earlier. If you look into the map of the Philippines, there is Mindanao, Visayas, and Luzon, and Visayas in the center in between Mindanao and Luzon. But compared to Luzon and Mindanao, Visayas is an archipelago. It's composed of many islands. And in the middle of the archipelago is an island called Panay Island, where Roja City is. Now, I was born in that island. And since I was born, we in the Visayas, we always experience difficulty in moving around within our region. Most of the time you have to fly to Manila to go to Cebu, when Cebu is just about 30 minutes away from Panay Island. And so Viva XCon became a sort of a political movement to bring the islands closer together. So it was like bridging the island, but at the same time, it was really meant to put up a bigger and a stronger formation among visual artists in the Visayas. Working in the Visayas or working in the region actually is no different from working in an urban center. In fact, most artists now would find themselves in the rural areas, having been bored or stagnated in the metropolis. But going to the rural areas and the countryside is in no way a romantic destination. The countryside is in no way a romantic destination for artists to have respite from work in Metro Manila, for example. There's more challenge for artists in the rural areas simply because art can be much more helpful for the lives of the local communities, for example. When resources are scarce, there's very little government support for self-organizations. And so I think if given the choice, or I have been given the choice actually, and we were talking about Green Papaya closing in 2021. So after 2021, I will find myself back in the countryside and making myself useful, to my former communities, to the communities where I used to belong. Maybe
Well,
I've been off tangent in my answer, but I really wanted to direct my answer towards that.
yeah, no, not at all. I mean, I think every exhibition, there's a longer context, a larger context that brings about the work. So I don't think it was off course at all. We have a couple of questions, Pee-wee, from our audience. So let me read them for you. The first one is from Joseph Garcia, and he says, for the other objects in the installations, I see details about normal life and fun, cosmetic jars, etc., things you find in people's homes. Is there any significance in their placement? Immersed as we are in a national tragedy, what does this exhibit say about living during and after a tragedy?
First and foremost, the cabinets and the objects within and situated inside the cabinets are meant to remind us actually that these are the same things that we can lose in a fire. Either we lose them as we grow old and we leave them behind as footprints of our lives here on Earth. But even during our lifetime, these are the same objects that we can lose in a disaster like a fire or with the recent typhoon, maybe in a flood. Each cabinet actually is meant to suggest a story about a particular person that used to possess the objects within the cabinet. So these personalities are, of course, fictional, but nonetheless, these personalities can represent other people who were actually having this kind of lifestyle, because our lifestyle actually can be reflected in objects as the objects that are placed inside the cabinets. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, let me just follow up on that a little bit. Can you talk about your use of the lights? So, for example, the cabinet with volt, or the one with flame. Or heat. Can you say why you decided to add those layers and the way that that you constructed them?
The text on the components that were added to the Ziggurat are text actually related to the fire. So I was trying to figure out what word to compose that is that could fit within the box, and for which I can use the limitations of the tubular lighting available to me. So it was, practically like playing the Scrabble. You're only allowed to, compose a 4-letter word, and you can only form the word from these letters. So the words that I was able to compose were heat, fume, and volt, because the fire actually that happened in Kamuning was caused by electrical wire. The lighting on the cabinets are actually expressions that I wanted to reflect, like UNH is something that is vague, so it's neither an exclamation of an excited person or somebody that's disappointed with a thing. The other cabinet has a word hunt. So, you usually go around hunting for objects and things. But they're also meant to put drama into the cabinet and highlight the contents of the cabinet.
Pee-wee, before we end, I just want to make sure we have time for a couple more questions. So this question comes from Claudia Wilson Tambunding, and she says, "Congratulations on this gorgeous exhibition, Pee-wee. You are such a gifted painter. I have seen how detailed and beautiful your paintings can be, and I have also seen how you enjoy doing whimsical themes in your paintings that are more like pop art. What inspires you to paint in one way or another?"
Hi, Claudia. Thank you for putting up a very difficult question. It's hard to say that you work because you're inspired by something. I think for me to put it in a better context, you work because there is something that you need to say. Sometimes there's no need for inspiration, because the drive to be able to express oneself is in itself is an inspiration by itself. So what drives me to work is simply my desire to communicate with my audience, my desire to tell my own story, my desire to critique something, and my desire to participate in this whole conversation of what can we talk about in order for us to live in a better society.
Thanks for that, Pee-wee. So I just want to read this to you. If we have our own items that we want you to use, will you agree to that, since I have my own mementos? So it looks like you have a fan who wants you to create artworks.
Okay, one quick answer to that. Some people, they go to portrait artists to have their portraits drawn or painted. I have actually gone through that. Some members of the family asking me to paint their photos and their portraits. I told them, no, I don't paint. Give me your personal items and I'll paint you a portrait.
Perfect. So before we close, if there aren't any more questions, then I'd like to thank Pee-wee very much for this conversation. And Pee-wee, can you remind us again how longer the exhibition will be up, so that people who are in Manila, perhaps they can see it?
Can I refer back to my gallery on the timetable of the exhibition? Maybe Diane or maybe Rach can.
Or in the meantime, let me just read you one more question.
Sure.
What a stimulating experience to listen to such an intelligent and articulate artist. My question to you is, what are you going to do with the embroidery?
Oh, as soon as the pandemic is over, when it will be safe for me to go out of the house and interact with a couple of embroiderers, then I will resume working on it, and who knows when these works will be ready for the exhibition. Just to say more about this, we go to Raon and Quiapo because that's where you find local embroiderers. So this desire to provide livelihood and business to ordinary people is also part of the whole process.
Okay, great. I just want to let our viewers know that the exhibition is up until November 21st. And one more comment from Angela Gadi. She says, congratulations, thank you for shedding light on the origins of this show. It was wonderful to hear the stories of how some of these works were salvaged and even made new. I think this discussion has made us appreciate Chebet's ziggurats more, and I'm sure these 100 ziggurats will be remembered as more than a tribute.
Thank you, Angela.
So I think with that comment, we can close the conversation, and we'll end with a short video in which Pee-wee talks about the fire and how it affected his work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pee-wee.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Norberto Roldan, but everyone in Manila calls me Pee-wee. And I'm preparing for my solo show opening in Silverlens on October 17. The idea for my exhibition started here. This used to be my studio. I was sharing this house with Green Papaya Art Projects, the space I co-founded in 2000 in Teachers Village, and we moved Green Papaya here in Kamuning in 2008. Between 2010 and 2012, my son Joaquin, who is now 17, and I lived here for more than a year before we found this house where we live now. Since 2009, this was the space where Green Papaya's small community gathered for the not-so-popular gigs and off-the-grid art activities. Green Papaya is the longest-running artist-led space in Metro Manila. It is a place where artists congregate to support one another, creating experimental and collaborative work, sharing of intellectual ideas over communal meals and drinks, and exchanging resources. Researchers, artists, and curators from Southeast Asia and elsewhere visit this space to discuss and research on Green Papaya's collection of material about its exhibitions, performances, publications, residencies, and collaborations. In addition to extensive documentation about these events, Green Papaya had more than 300 artists donated works on canvas, paper, photographs, and objects before the fire. Last June 3, a fire caused by a faulty electrical wire from a neighboring unit turned the space into a furnace, burning and damaging a good part of the archives and many of my works. A few hours after the fire department declared a fire out, while the whole place was drenched in water and the rotten smell of smoke and the tiny burnt particles filled the air, we started the painful ritual of retrieving what has been left from the rubbles. A few bigger artworks from the collection, which were bubble wrapped, were totally burned. Smaller artworks that were contained in boxes were only slightly damaged. It did not take long for our community, friends, partners, and network, both from home and abroad, to come to our rescue. The Lopez Museum Conservation Laboratory sheltered our archives and undertook the necessary first aid to save the most fragile of our materials. Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong provided technical assistance as we unfolded artworks damaged by the fire. Donations from friends and fundings from the Foundation for Arts Initiatives, Gerte, and Mercedes Sobel are currently enabling Green Papaya to rise from the tragedy and rebuild its archive facility again. My heart is filled with humility and so much gratitude. Meanwhile, out of 30 of my own works, 16 survived the fire, 10 from a new series called The Fugitives, which originally counted 14, and 6 altars, which originally counted 12. These 10 surviving works, which adopted the longer title, Fugitives from the Land of the Rising Sun, are assemblages with found objects, found poetry, and Japanese wooden boxes. The series is an allusion to Japanese characters in romantic novels that are yet to be written. They were in different stages of production since 2018 that got stalled when the pandemic struck in March. 2 completed works were badly burned, but I decided to include them in the exhibition to remind myself of the works I have lost in the fire and the ones that withstood it. The 6 altars came from the series 100 Altars for Roberto Chabet, which came home after being featured in an exhibition, Seismograph, Sensing the City, Art in the Urban Age, in Art Stage, Singapore in 2016. The altars pay tribute to Chabet and a bygone era personified by the Kamuning district. Through this series, I tried to reflect on the notions of progress, modernity, and social decay. The altars are made up of architectural debris from demolished old houses in Kamuning, one of the oldest districts in Manila. The materials come mostly from post-war bungalows that are quickly disappearing. In their place, badly designed and cheaply built townhouses are being erected. Anyway, this exhibition has become a witness to an enormous effort and emotional struggle, not only to save some precious products of my own labor, but to inject new life into them. And in that sense, the exhibition is also about the victory over defeat. As a recognition of this victory, I constructed 3 new installations that were not in Green Papaya when the fire happened. The cabinet installations stand tall as a monument to a person's cherished possessions. The objects may reveal the person's obsessions, vanities, and values, or they can simply signify something which is mundane or remarkable. But these are things, however, one can simply lose in a fire. These altars, including the cabinets, also serve as receptacles for an informal archive or displaced or misplaced ethnographic materials. The altars are inspired by Roberto Chabet's work. One of his most enduring series of collages from the 70s was called Ziggurats.